Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a generation that confuses lust with love, attention with affection, and control with connection. But today, I want to speak to you about something deeper, something that echoes in the heart of every man, whether he admits it or not. Why men fall harder for women who let them go. Now, this isn't about games. It's not about manipulation. It's about value. True value. When a woman has the strength to walk away, not out of pride, but out of principle, when she refuses to beg for love that isn't freely given, she reveals something that shakes a man to his core. She doesn't need him to define her worth. And that is when he begins to see her differently. This is not a worldly concept. It reflects a biblical truth, as sometimes you must let go to reveal what was real all along. So I ask you, what does it say about us if we only value what we've lost? And men, why does it take absence to awaken honor? A woman's worth is not measured by a man's attention. That is a truth lost in our time. We live in a culture where validation has become the new identity and attention, the currency of value. But attention is not love. It is not respect. It is not commitment. A man's glance, a man's praise, a man's temporary fascination. These things are not what define the worth of a woman. And yet, so many have been led to believe that they are. From the time she is young, a girl is fed the lie that being seen is the same as being cherished. That being wanted is the same as being valued. But there is a vast difference between a man who notices you and a man who honors you. One requires only a glance, the other a lifetime. And the tragedy is that so many women settle for being noticed because they've never seen what it looks like to be treasured. A woman's worth does not increase or decrease based on who stays or who walks away. Her identity is not wrapped in the attention she receives, but in the truth of who she is when no one is watching. The attention of a man may feel powerful in the moment. It may stir emotions. It may even offer a fleeting sense of purpose. But if her foundation is built upon it, she will be shaken every time he shifts his gaze elsewhere. Attention is cheap. It costs nothing. It is easily given and quickly withdrawn. But worth, that is something eternal, it is not granted by man, it is recognized by the wise. A woman who knows her worth is dangerous to the shallow man. Why? Because she cannot be controlled by crumbs. She will not beg at the table of inconsistency. She does not wait for validation that she already possesses within her soul. Men often fall for women who let them go because it exposes something uncomfortable. The illusion of control shatters. The man who believed she needed his attention to feel secure suddenly realizes she was never dependent on it. And that, more than anything, reveals the truth she was strong all along. Her love was not weakness. Her presence was not desperation. It was a choice. And when she walks away, she chooses herself, her peace, her purpose, not out of bitterness, but because she refuses to be reduced to a reaction. A woman who understands her worth doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't cling to broken promises. She observes, discerns, and decides. She is not moved by noise. She is not impressed by empty words or inconsistent effort. She doesn't fall for charm. She listens for character. Because she knows something most overlook attention. Without intention is manipulation in disguise. And she would rather be alone in truth than embraced in falsehood. The problem is not that men don't give attention. The problem is that too many women have been conditioned to believe that any attention is better than no attention. That being wanted, even momentarily, is somehow enough, but it's not. Being wanted is not the same as being worthy. Being desired is not the same as being honored. And until she knows that difference deep in her bones, she will always live in a state of emotional starvation, accepting crumbs when she was made for more. True worth is quiet. It does not scream for approval. It stands firm even when overlooked. It says, I know who I am, even if you don't see it. That kind of woman shakes the pride of a man because he cannot manipulate what he cannot move. He cannot control what he cannot confuse. She sees through the performance. She discerns the heart behind the words. And if it is not real, she will walk away, not out of spite, but out of wisdom. Some men only realize a woman's worth when she's gone. They begin to understand that what they call too much was actually substance. That what they ignored was stability. That what they walked away from was depth, loyalty, and a love that didn't come from insecurity, but from choice. But by the time they understand, she's already gone, not waiting, not watching, not hoping, just gone. And still, even in her absence, her worth remains because it was never dependent on his attention in the first place. Letting go reveals true strength, not weakness. That's a truth this world rarely understands. In a culture that equates holding on with loyalty and endurance, we often forget that sometimes the greatest act of love, boldest expression of self-respect, is knowing when to release what no longer honors us. Letting go is not quitting. It is not giving up. It is not running away. Letting go is the decision to no longer fight for someone who is not fighting for you. Quiet courage to walk away when your spirit is being diminished and your worth overlooked. There is a certain kind of strength in the woman who lets go, not out of spite, not out of rage, but out of reverence for her own soul. She has cried the tears, endured the confusion, tried to understand the silences, the broken promises, the shifting moods. She's prayed for change, hoped for growth, waited for him to see her fully. But the moment she lets go is the moment she chooses clarity over chaos. And that takes strength. A strength that the world might not recognize. But heaven certainly does. Weakness is not found in letting go. Weakness is found in clinging to what is crumbling, in staying silent when your soul is screaming for peace, in tolerating what wounds you because you're afraid of being alone. The truth is, letting go is often the hardest thing to do because it requires us to face ourselves, to face our fears, and to believe that we are enough without the thing we thought we needed. And that is why so few people do it, because it is easier to stay in dysfunction than to face the unknown. Something powerful about a woman who refuses to settle, who recognizes that love without respect is not love at all, who understands that someone being present in her life doesn't always mean they are investing in her soul. Letting go says, choose peace even if it costs me your presence. It says, I will no longer betray myself to keep you comfortable. And in a world where self-abandonment is often praised as sacrifice, that is radical strength. A strong woman doesn't need to slam doors or make loud declarations. Her strength is in her quiet resolve, in the way she chooses her dignity over desperation, in how she walks away from what no longer serves her growth. Even when her heart still feels attached, she knows that feelings are real, but they are not always truth. And sometimes your heart will mourn the very thing your soul is being freed from. Letting go is not about who was right or wrong. It's not about proving a point. It's about alignment, about realizing that no matter how much you want something to work, if it's not healthy, if it's not holy, if it's not building you up, it's breaking you down. And there comes a time when you must choose yourself. Not in pride, but in protection of your future, your calling, your wholeness. There is this idea that staying is always noble, that love is proven by endurance. But not all endurance is godly. Not all perseverance is righteous. Sometimes what we call faithfulness is actually fear. Fear of letting go. Fear of being alone. Fear of not being enough. But when a woman chooses to let go, Not because she stopped loving, because she started valuing herself. She begins to walk in a strength that cannot be faked. This strength isn't loud. It doesn't need to post quotes or seek revenge. It doesn't hope he suffers or regrets. It just moves forward slowly, intentionally, peacefully, because she has come to understand that true strength is not found in holding on what wounds you, but in trusting that your healing is worth more than someone else's comfort. Letting go forces growth. It reveals where your identity has been rooted. If it was rooted in someone's attention, then when they leave, you crumble. But if it's rooted in truth, then even in loss, you rise, because you know who you are. You are not the relationship. You are not the rejection. You are not the abandonment. You are not the goodbye. You are the one who endured it, faced it, and still chose to walk away when staying meant losing yourself. The world might call it giving up. They might whisper that you were too sensitive, too impatient, too unwilling to fight. But they don't know the nights you cried. They don't know the weight you carried. They don't know how long you stayed after the joy was gone. They don't know how much of yourself you gave to keep something alive that was already dying. They don't see the strength it took to let go, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself. Distance often awakens dormant respect. When something or someone is always within reach, it's easy to overlook the value they bring. It's human nature to take for granted what is consistent, what is available, what is always present without fail. But the moment distance enters, when the presence that was once guaranteed suddenly disappears, a shift takes place. That's when realization begins to stir. That's when respect, once buried under familiarity and routine, starts to awaken. People often don't see the weight of your presence until it's removed. They don't recognize the depth of your effort, the warmth of your consistency, or the quiet strength of your loyalty until there's silence where your voice once filled the room. It is in that silence that memories begin to echo. The words you spoke, the support you gave, the patience you extended, all of it begins to ring louder in absence than it ever did in presence. There's something about distance that reveals reality. When emotions are high and people are entangled in daily routines, easy to become blind. But when space is created, when time passes without your text, your call, your effort, when the truth rises to the surface, did they value you, or did they just get used to you? Did they appreciate your presence, or did they assume it was permanent? Distance is not just about physical space. It's emotional and mental as well. When a woman decides to step back, not in anger, but in wisdom, she gives the other person the gift of perspective. She says without saying, "See what life feels like without me." Not to manipulate, but to clarify. Because sometimes people need to feel the void before they can see the value. When you're always available, always accommodating, always forgiving, some people begin to believe that your love is unconditional in a way that permits neglect. They confuse your grace with tolerance. They think your silence is agreement. But when distance replaces access, they are forced to confront a world where you are no longer their emotional cushion, no longer their easy option, no longer the one who stays no matter how carelessly they behave. Respect isn't always born in closeness. In fact, for some, closeness dulls their vision. They stop seeing your worth because they assume it will always be there. But when you step away, when your name no longer lights up their phone, when your energy is no longer invested in them, something begins to change. They start to feel the absence, not just of your body, but of your support, your peace, your prayers, your presence. Distance gives them time to think, to reflect, to see what they were too distracted or too arrogant to notice before. And in that reflection, many begin to see what they missed, what they mishandled, what they mistreated, not because they were blind, but because they were comfortable. And sometimes it takes the cold of distance to make them appreciate the warmth they once ignored. It's often in your absence that others learn to respect what your presence carried. They realize you weren't just someone who filled space. You brought life into the space. You weren't just someone who loved. They begin to see how rare that love was, because when you stop showing up, they're left with the silence that once was filled with your effort. And it is in that silence, in that space, that they begin to wake up. They may not say it out loud, but the mind replays moments. The heart reconsiders assumptions. The soul, which once was numb to your value, begins to stir with regret, with clarity, with the heavy awareness that you were more than they treated you as. Distance teaches lessons that presence often hides. It strips away entitlement and brings truth into focus. And for many, it's only when they can no longer reach you that they begin to truly see you. Not as an option, not as a fallback, but as someone who carried grace, strength, and honor in ways they didn't understand until it was no longer in front of them. So while some may fear creating distance, it is often in that very act that respect is restored, not because you demanded it, but because you allowed space to speak the truth that words could not. Fall harder when they realize what they took for granted. It doesn't always happen right away. Sometimes the realization comes long after the woman has gone silent, after the door has closed, after the calls stop coming. In the beginning, he may feel relief, pride, or even indifference. He may convince himself that letting her go was the right decision. Time has a way of peeling back the layers of illusion. And with time, he begins to see. She wasn't just another woman. She was the one who gave more than she received, the one who stayed when she had every reason to leave, the one who loved him in ways he didn't yet understand. There's something about consistency that becomes invisible. When someone is always there, loving, forgiving, supporting, it becomes easy to overlook the weight of what they carry. Men don't always recognize the power of presence until they feel the ache of its absence. And by then, it's no longer something they can reach for. It becomes a memory instead of a reality, and that's when the fall begins. Not the fall in love, but the fall into regret. When a woman truly loves, she gives her all. She doesn't love halfway. She prays for him, believes in him, stands beside him, even when he doubts himself. She sees beyond the surface into the potential he may not yet have tapped into. But when that love is met with indifference or taken for granted, it doesn't disappear, it transforms. It shifts from affection to awareness. She starts to see that love is not enough if it isn't mutual. That effort cannot be one-sided. Staying in a space where she is not valued will slowly dismantle her soul. At first, he doesn't notice the shift because he's still caught in the routine of her loyalty. He thinks she'll always be there. He assumes the late night talks, the forgiveness, the support, the care. Those things are automatic. That's the danger of familiarity. It blinds a man to the treasure he has until the treasure no longer resides in his world. And when she finally lets go, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion, he is left with silence that speaks louder than her words ever could. And that silence haunts him because it's in that silence he starts to remember. He remembers the way she smiled at him when he was broken. The way she held space for him when he had nothing to offer. The way she never asked him to be perfect, only present. And he begins to realize she was not replaceable, not because she was flawless, but because her love was rare. Her presence wasn't loud, but it was steady. And now that it's gone, everything else feels hollow. Men fall harder because they often fall late. They fall when the chase is over, when the certainty they once enjoyed is replaced by the sting of loss. When they scroll through old photos or drive past places that hold memories and the weight of what they let go finally settles in their chest. They fall. They fall when they see her happy without them. When they realize that she no longer checks in, no longer worries about them, no longer gives energy to what once drained her. And it hits different when the woman who gave everything now gives nothing. Not out of hate, but out of healing. The fall isn't immediate. It builds. It creeps in slowly. At first, it's curiosity. Then it's nostalgia. Then it's sorrow. And finally, it's the deep ache of knowing he had something pure and didn't recognize its value. That fall is heavier than most. Because it's not about losing someone to another man. It's about losing someone to herself, to her growth, her peace, her evolution. She didn't leave to find better. She left to become better. And that truth is what makes the fall irreversible. No grand gesture can undo the damage of prolonged neglect. No late apology can rewind time. Once a woman sees her worth, she doesn't unsee it. And once a man realizes what he took for granted, he is often left standing in the ruins of his own choices. The strength she once used to stay is now used to walk away. And the very love that once fought for him now protects her from him. The irony, he didn't fall when she loved him. He fell when she stopped. When he saw the reflection of his mistakes in her absence, when he realized that what he thought would wait for him had already moved on. Not every woman who walks away does so because she stopped loving. In fact, the deepest kind of love often leaves in silence, not because it vanished, but because it was no longer safe to stay. Love, real love, does not always scream or slam doors. Sometimes it gathers its strength, folds itself into quiet dignity, and walks away not with hatred in its heart, but with a soul too tired to keep pouring into something that doesn't pour back. A woman doesn't stop loving just because she starts choosing herself. She stops trying because she has finally realized that love alone cannot hold together what two hearts must carry together. She may still pray for him. She may still carry his name in her heart. She may still replay memories in her mind late at night. She doesn't return, not because she doesn't care, because she has come to understand that care without reciprocation becomes self-destruction. She is not bitter, but she is awake. Awake to the truth that staying in the name of love while slowly losing herself is not loyalty. It's abandonment of her own soul. There's a cost to loving someone who refuses to grow. A cost to being the one who always understands, always bends, always forgives. Begins to chip away at her joy. It turns her laughter into caution. Her patience into quiet sadness. She begins to recognize that she cannot heal someone who does not want to change. That she cannot be the only one carrying the weight of a relationship meant for two. And when that moment of clarity comes, she doesn't wait for an apology or a final conversation. She simply withdraws. She detaches with grace because she knows now that staying would mean betraying her own peace. A woman's heart is not a limitless well. It gives, it pours, it extends compassion, but even wells run dry, especially when they are drawn from with no return. She may have stayed longer than she should have, not out of weakness, but because she hoped he would see her. She believed in his potential. She looked past his patterns and prayed he would step into something greater. But when nothing changed, when her love became an expectation instead of a treasure, she realized that loving him was not enough if it meant losing herself. She walked slowly, quietly, with the kind of sadness that only comes when you've loved deeply and finally understand that your love cannot do it all. She walks not to punish, but to preserve what remains of her spirit. She walks because she's tired of waiting for someone to value what she so freely gave. She walks because the version of herself that stayed was slowly fading, and she knew if she didn't leave, she'd lose more than just time. She'd lose the very essence of who she was. Love is not always enough when effort is one-sided, when growth is stagnant, when communication becomes arguments and affection turns into avoidance. She may still carry love in her heart, but she also carries wisdom now. And that wisdom tells her if love costs you your joy, your sanity, your strength, it is no longer love. It is sacrifice without purpose. And no woman is called to be a martyr in the name of someone else's immaturity. She doesn't owe explanations. She doesn't need to prove that she cared. Her past efforts were loud enough. Her loyalty was evidence. Her tears were testimony. And now her silence is the final act of love, the love she gives to herself. Because after all the giving, all the hoping, all the waiting, she finally understands choosing herself is not betrayal. It is survival. It is healing. It is the necessary act of reclaiming a heart that was never meant to be broken so carelessly. The power of knowing your worth cannot be overstated. A woman who recognizes her value doesn't need to chase affection, validation, or attention. She carries within her the quiet confidence that she is enough as she is. Her worth isn't determined by the opinions or actions of others. It doesn't fluctuate based on how she is treated or how much someone desires her. She knows her value doesn't come from external sources. It comes from the core of who she is, from the depth of her spirit, from the beauty of her mind, and the strength of her soul. In a world that often seeks to diminish women or reduce them to their roles in others' lives, knowing one's worth is an act of defiance. Standing firm in a society that might try to convince you that your worth is based on your appearance, your status, or your relationship with someone else. But a woman who knows her worth doesn't fall for that illusion. She understands that she is not here to meet someone else's needs at the expense of her own peace and purpose. She doesn't need to be constantly praised or admired to believe in her own beauty, intelligence, and strength. She knows that her worth is intrinsic, and this understanding doesn't come overnight. It's a journey, one that involves falling, rising, and learning to trust herself in the face of disappointment and rejection. It's the realization that not everyone will appreciate what you bring to the table, and that's okay. Quiet acceptance that sometimes the people you invest in won't invest back, but through it all, she doesn't lose sight of who she is. She learns that her identity isn't tied to the people who leave or the ones who fail to recognize her value. It is tied to her own self-awareness, her integrity, and her inner strength. A woman who knows her worth has boundaries. She doesn't allow herself to be treated with disrespect or indifference. She doesn't accept half-hearted affection, empty promises, or inconsistency. She knows what she deserves, and she will not settle for anything less. Her boundaries are not walls of defense. They are markers of respect. They are signals that she values herself enough to not tolerate mistreatment. And this is why men fall harder for women who let them go, because they begin to realize that the woman who once gave everything is now no longer available to be taken for granted. The woman who once stayed despite everything is now gone, not because she didn't care, but because she has finally recognized that her love and energy are not for sale at any price. This realization hits men harder than they expect. They may have taken her for granted, assuming that her loyalty would never falter, that her affection would always be there, waiting for them to decide when they were ready to acknowledge it. But when she walks away, when she finally chooses herself over him, the reality sets in. The love they once had is no longer guaranteed. And it's in that moment, when they no longer have access to her, they start to truly understand the depth of her worth. Knowing your worth means you never have to beg for attention, affection, or commitment. You don't need to convince anyone to stay, because you understand that the people who truly value you will stay without being asked. The men who fall harder for women who let them go are often the ones who mistook her loyalty for weakness, her silence for agreement, her patience for dependence. When they see her walking away, they are forced to confront their own actions or lack thereof. And it's then that they realize how much they had taken for granted. A woman who knows her worth doesn't settle. She doesn't tolerate being treated like an option or an afterthought. She knows that she is a whole person deserving of love and respect, not as an accessory to someone else's life, but as a powerful individual with her own purpose, dreams, and values. And when she lets go, it's not because she's giving up. It's because she's letting go of the weight of someone who never truly valued her in the way she deserves. In that moment, she reclaims her peace, her power, and her life. And that is something no one can ever take away.